Hi everyone, welcome to the panel of YA ThrillerCon 2020. This one is all about writing diverse YA thrillers, and Gila Green will be moderating this. So I'll hand us over to you, Gila, and we can get started with introductions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm really excited to be here. I love reading authors from all over the world. It's a real passion of mine. So this is a real treat for me. And thank you, Madeline Dyer, for organizing and inviting me to join you and be part of your very creative and exciting event. We're talking today about diversity in young adult, which is a very, very hot topic. I don't know how terribly new it is, but it's very hot topic right now, and it's just coming at us all over the place. So it's really, really relevant, and I'm really keen to hear what everybody thinks. Before I start with question one, we're just going to go around, and everybody could just tell us a little bit about themselves, introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. So Nia Davenport.
Hey, I'm Nia. I write adult MG and YA, science fiction, fantasy, and also thrillers. I'm super huge on having Black girl protags as my main characters because that's not something we get to see. We don't get to see it enough in all spectrums of fiction. So that's my thing. I'm also a teacher. I teach 9th, 10th, and 11th grade biology, a 10th grade lit class, and AP bio.
Oh.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah. Busy.
Okay. Isvari.
Hi, I'm Isvari. I run a sort of nonprofit. I'm a lawyer by day with writing. I absolutely love to write thrillers, whether it's war thrillers or spy thrillers, adult and YA. I also write a lot of YA contemporary books. Protagonists are almost always diverse. I've done that since I was writing novels since I was a kid. I sort of looked at it as writing the world I lived in. I didn't even realize I was doing that until lately when the conversation picked up about just how few diverse characters there are. And I started to realize that was a large part of the reason it was harder for me to make it as an author. And so this is such a great panel to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow. Like so many creative people. Okay. Fran.
Hi, so I'm Fran. I am a bookseller by day, and by night I write primarily adult thrillers, psychological thrillers specifically, but I do dabble in YA, particularly YA fantasy. And my main focal point for my books generally is LGBT plus diversity. So my first book has a lesbian main character and a bisexual protagonist, and my second book has a lesbian and an asexual character. So the focal point for the couples generally is LGBT because, you know, growing up I didn't really see that a whole lot, so I like to try and get that in my fiction as much as possible.
Oh, fantastic. Madeline.
Hi, yeah, I'm Madeline. I write YA dystopians and YA thrillers. I'm a disabled writer. I've got chronic illnesses as well, so that crops up in a lot of my books. Most of my main characters in my thrillers are either disabled with the same genetic condition that I have, or there's a heavy emphasis on mental health, particularly like neuropsychiatric disorders. So I have a condition where I get brain inflammation and then it causes psychosis and hallucinations and OCD. So yeah, my fiction does center a lot around sort of like chronic illness, disability, and mental health.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm Gila Green. I'm Canadian originally, but I've been living in Israel for, I'm not going to date myself too much, but let's say for more than 20 years now. I write stories that primarily take place in the Middle East, whether it's historically going back to the Ottoman Empire or British mandate Palestine, or futuristic Israel stories. But I pivoted a couple years ago to environmental fiction, to dealing with environmental issues, and my YA novel No Entry takes place in South Africa in Kruger National Park. So one of the heroes of that story is an elephant, because the the series is dealing with trying to highlight elephant poaching and elephant extinction, which is even more relevant now with COVID-19 and going into animal spaces and the repercussions of that. I tend to make my heroines Sephardi Jews or Yemenite Jews, Jews of color, because growing up, I was obviously a huge bookworm, and when there were Jewish characters, they were always white characters with a European background, which is great and which is legitimate, but it wasn't me, and I always felt like there was no diversity of Jewish characters. Jewish people come in all different colors, and so I make a point of having a lot of diversity in those characters in my books. So this is really great. We're going to just start off. We've already touched a little bit on the first question about diversity. People throw that word around. It's almost become like a, I don't want to say jargon because it's still a legitimate word, but it's almost getting to the level of jargonese with diversity. So, or that's my opinion. So what do you guys think? What do you think diversity in young adult fiction means?
I think it's about showing so many different kinds of lives and so many different kinds of people so that everybody can find an echo of some of their existence in fiction, because that's why we read to understand the world. And you know, what good is that if all you're reading is the same books over and over again and those books don't speak to you? So I think diversity in fiction is so important because it really does mean that you are seeing yourself and seeing your friends and seeing your family in books and you know, interacting. I think especially young adult, because that's the age that you are when you're really starting to explore the world.
I think diversity, and I agree with all of that, and I think diversity also sort of means getting authentic, diverse voices, and that's something I've seen a lot of discussion about on Twitter lately. It's something I'm very passionate about. I think even when you do see diverse characters today in young adult, and especially adult, I would say, literature, there's a certain narrative that sells well, whether it's an immigrant story if you're a person of color, or the difficulties of coming out if you're a sexual minority. And I think that there's sort of that narrative that is what plays well. And in a sense, you're writing for, even if you are diverse, you're writing for the majority audience instead of writing for people like you. And so something I think is so important in diversity is getting an authentic voice. What do people of color, what do sexual minorities, what do we sound like? And have you actually captured that voice? And it's something I've talked to Maddie a lot before as well, about capturing, for example, the voices of people with disability authentically rather than it being a tool in the story. And I think that's a really great example where we've sort of forgotten voices have to be authentic and they have to sound like they actually are. It's not just a part of your character. It can be a part of your identity. It's a part of how you speak and how you emote. And so I think lately agents and editors are sort of responding to that, and they realize a lot of the ways that they adapted in the past, or the way that they looked at books in the past, sometimes didn't accept that diversity, and they would reject books that didn't sound like they would sell, or they didn't sound like they were used to, because they weren't necessarily used to that voice. And so I think capturing that authentic voice and making sure it's represented is super important.
Yeah, okay. I really agree with that. Does anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I agree with all of that too. And just to, you know, add on a different piece, diversity for me is definitely showing, you know, diverse representation that's also positive and affirming within the stories, but it's also having diverse authors telling those stories. And actually, you know, I know the term own voices, and we're going to get to it. It's kind of falling out of favor. But I really think there's an important component by having marginalized writers tell the stories of, you know, the marginalizations or the identities that they bear. Just, you know, to have that facet of the experience and the voice, and to amplify and uplift authors that have been traditionally locked out of publishing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And also, like, sort of like own voices books written by like the marginalized authors who share their identity. The portrayals then are a lot more like authentic and positive, and you do avoid the stereotypes. Because I found, particularly like looking at sort of like disability representation in fiction, when it's an able-bodied author, the disabled character is often quite stereotypical, and sometimes like the disability is like used in order to teach the main character something, so they're very much used as a plot device. So yeah, just like Nia was saying, just giving more space to these marginalized authors to write their own stories and like the identities that they have and the experiences that they live with day to day.
And I think as well, like one of the things that I find really important is reading books where those things are not necessarily the main focus point. Like they you know, it's great if they are, but you know, particularly in my experience as a gay woman, I read a lot of books that feature gay characters where the focal point is coming out. And particularly at my age, like I've reached the point where I don't want to read books like that. And as a teen, I didn't really want to read books like that all the time. I wanted to read books where characters were just diverse, and yes, you know, it impacts their daily life, but not in a way that is the focal point of the plot, because that's not just what I want to read about. I want to read about lots of different kinds of people experiencing the same things, you know, as straight, white, able-bodied people. Like I just want a good story with a diverse cast.
Yeah, it's really interesting, your points about, because of course I'm sure we all are working on a new novel, and it's really interesting to hear these not falling into the trap of the plot devices and the you know, like, or what you're saying is their diversity is always the plot. It's always the point. You know, like if you bring home a friend who's of color or something, the whole book is going to be about that. It's all the time, every time, the same thing, rather than just another story. That's really interesting. Okay, I'll have to try to moderate and take notes at the same time. So you touched a little bit about on the own voices a little, but do you have more to say about that? What do you think that this own voices is very important? I have to try to interpret this question. I'm going to be honest with you because I don't know 100% what you're saying. I take it to mean, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're saying is it important that only a person of that background, whether it's sexual background or racial, ethnic background, linguistic background, whatever it is, write that story? Is that what you mean by own voices and being important?
Yeah, like
I'm misunderstanding the question.
No, I think if you're writing a story like about a specific experience and that story is completely focused on that, then it should ideally be like an own voices book with an author of that like marginalization.
Okay, so I understood it. So
yeah.
Okay. What is your view on that? It's complicated, right?
Yeah, like I think it's perfectly fine for like anyone to write sort of like their with the character. But if you're writing a book solely about
Sorry, Madeline, your volume just went down a little bit. Did it drop for you guys also?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if you're writing a book about a marginalized experience and it's about the character having that experience, I do think it needs to be sort of like a marginalized author telling that story, because like it's fine to include like diverse characters who you don't care about those identities with, but if you're writing specifically about that experience, I do think it needs to be a marginalized author telling that story, because otherwise you're taking up space that should go to another author who isn't marginalized. Like that same identity. So I think it's like you've got to be careful not to place of other authors. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't include like all like diverse representation.
I think there's a difference between own voices stories as well, and if you're telling a story that benefits from having an own voices voice to it, then you have to interrogate whether you are the right person to tell that story. If you are just including diverse casts as a matter of course, I think that's different. I think you can do that anyway, and that doesn't require you to be own voices. But I would question kind of who your focus character and who your central character is, and who the plot benefits, and then weigh up whether it's something you should be interrogating further, like whether you should be the one to tell the story or whether there is someone who is better suited to tell that story.
But do you think that, are you only talking about the protagonist or are you
I
talking
think
about?
primarily, yes. I know a lot of people don't necessarily agree on this, but from my perspective, your protagonist is the thoughts that we see on the page, and so that for me is where the sort of the point of authenticity is, because that's the voice that you're telling. So I think that if I were to include a diverse cast who has experiences outside of my own, from my protagonist's point of view, I think that is something that you can do. But I think that if you are writing a protagonist who does not share, say, your sexual identity or your experiences or your skin color or anything like that, then you need to weigh up why you're telling that story. Makes sense.
Okay, so you're not saying forget it completely. You're saying you need to ask yourself why you're telling that story.
And I think you need to really question whether it's your place to tell it as well.
Yeah. And just to add on, I also think even when we're talking about like secondary characters, especially like the main supporting cast, and you choose, to make it diverse and their identities outside of your own, you also need to question why you're choosing certain marginalizations for your secondary characters. Are you just using them as tools? Are you just using them as props? Are you just using their marginalization because that's what's quote unquote like on trend? Because none of those are okay or sufficient reasons. So you really have to, do the work to question, why did I make this secondary character too? This identity, and also can I accurately portray this identity without doing harm?
Yeah.
For me,
So
I
I'm
think
curious to know if you think. Sorry, I just want
No.
to snag it. Do you think that this basically falls for people who are writing young adult realism, and then once you get into fantasy,
No.
and how is it working when you're talking about?
I'm a huge fantasy writer, and I think that falls for if you're writing contemporary fantasy, thriller, sci-fi, dystopian, whatever the case may be, because even if you create a fantasy world where there aren't the real world racial or identity constructs of ours, you're still using real world marginalizations as like the analog for your diverse fantasy cast, and people are still going to read identities into your diverse fantasy cast. So you still have to do the work and be careful not to perpetuate harm even with your secondary cast, and to really ask yourself, why am I assigning this fantasy character this type of coding or this type of identity?
Because we all have biases, don't we? With maybe conscious, maybe they're unconscious, but that's part of our job, is to question those biases and make sure that we're not perpetuating any harm or doing disservice.
So if people are vampires or witches, you've got to watch. You're saying what kind of?
Yeah, I mean, because you could totally have like a brown vampire, and if you give me a vampire and you tell me that he has dark brown skin with, curly, 4C hair, I'm going to read that vampire as being a Black individual. And, you can perpetuate harm if you're not careful about how you portray that Black vampire's persona, what stereotypes you are employing, which ones you need to avoid. Vampires, fae, shifters, immortals, some alien race, whatever the case may be. There's definitely real world coding that goes into all of the fantasy races that you create.
For me, I think own voices is sort of, I think two things. One is I absolutely agree with what all of you have been saying. I like seeing more diversity in literature. And I also think that sometimes I see in the industry, there's a push to make people who are of color or are minority authors be a little stricter about own voice than white counterparts. And I think that that's really unfair. And so I would love to see people who are traditionally privileged sort of leave that space for people who can write those characters more authentically. And I kind of ironically think it's we who worry about this more.
Yeah.
And I think that I love seeing intersectional casts. And so I write with co-authors. And so that's one way that I've tried to, authentically write intersectional casts. But I think that if you can write intersectional casts, that's awesome. For me, I think if the story is sort of about the identity, and if that's like a large driving force, that's where I really think it's best to write own voices. In fact, I would just like to see fewer authors even do that if you're not part of the marginalized community, especially if it's sort of the real world, or even if it's fantasy, if the identity is a large part of the story and it's like a driving part, that's that person's sort of story to tell. The other thing that I always think with own voices, especially with people who have disabilities and with sexual identity minorities or the LGBTQIA plus community, is sometimes it is own voices, but the people who are writing it aren't out. And so that's where I'm a little bit more careful about, I guess, judging a book or judging an author who might be very much writing their identity, but might not be out with an invisible disability, or they might not be out with their sexuality. And so that's sort of something I always think about as well.
That's a really good point as well. Yeah, I think that sometimes the focus on own voices can be at detriment to own voices authors who aren't necessarily ready or able to explore that in the public domain, which is partly probably why we're writing these books.
That's a really interesting point. I actually hadn't thought about that. So so if you're writing disabled characters, it's almost like you're saying, so that you can legitimize yourself, you have to come out and put your medical file on online, which is not which shouldn't be a requirement before you write a book, right? But then on the other hand, right, so that's a really, really good point. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna moderate and write things down. Okay, this is all kind of related. I think you've kind of answered the next question, which is how important is it to show multifaceted and nuanced marginalization in YA fiction? So you've all kind of talked about, it's obviously extremely important. All kind of talked about them. So we'll just maybe move on to, you've also touched on this a little bit when you were talking about plot points. I think this is what you meant, this question about why is tokenism harmful, which I'm assuming relates to like, okay, she'll be white, but she'll have one Black gay friend, and that way I'll kind of, cover my bases or whatever it is, but nothing else about the story will go into that. So maybe you can just talk a little about that, and how can a writer really avoid tokenism?
Yeah.
Because you do want to have, let's say you have a character who's a certain background and he wants to have diverse friends. So how do they not become tokens? How many characters do you have?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the big thing I always tell people is, have diverse friends in real life. And I mean, I feel like that's the easiest thing. And like, no, but you'd be surprised how many authors, especially how many white authors, like have no friends. Like I actually know somebody who was writing a Middle Eastern character, a Middle Eastern Muslim character, and had no either Middle Eastern or Muslim friends. And I'm like, you can't write this. You don't know what they sound like. You're writing it as a token. They sound white. They act white. And you're just inserting that so that your book is a little more trendy or woke, and that's not okay. So I think that's a really easy way to, like I kind of said, when I started writing, I didn't even realize I was writing diversity because this was a long time ago. It wasn't a thing. And I was genuinely just sort of writing the world I saw, which wasn't cis and straight and white. So if you're writing that, that's awesome. But if you're not, and you're just inserting a character because it's cool, then you risk doing what sort of, I think Fran and Maddie were talking about earlier as well, where you just turn that into a small part of their person and you pretend like it's completely irrelevant to the rest of the story, or you make very like ableist or straight normative or any of those assumptions about how a character is going to behave and act. And sort of back to the earlier point about voice, it then just doesn't sound authentic. It's clear that what you were doing was using that person's race or identity as a plot point, which is just so unfair and cruel. And I think in addition to in books, it then translates into the movies that are made off of books. It translates into society. It translates into expectations of what people of color and people with disabilities have to sound like and look like at jobs. And so it's really caused, I think, ripple effects across society because things start with books. Our society starts with books.
I agree with all of that.
Have diverse friends, that's what I'm talking, and what would be something else like writers could do to avoid this tokenism?
I agree with all of that. I think in addition, sensitivity readers, and I know we're getting to this question too, but you should definitely hire sensitivity readers. You should listen to their feedback and internalize it and really apply it and not just dismiss it, because that happens way too often as well. Because yes, it starts with actually having diverse friends, but even if you have, tons of friends of the identity that's not your own that you're writing, you still don't know and will never know all the small intricacies and nuances and just faux pas just about writing that identity. So you hire sensitivity readers that reflect that marginalization or that identity, and you genuinely listen to their feedback and employ it.
Yeah, and I think as well, just this doesn't. It's not one thing that you can do that will fix all of your problems.
Yeah.
But one thing that can then that really help as well is reading diversely. Just expose yourself to as much media as possible from backgrounds, from creators who have backgrounds that are different to yours, because although it won't solve the problem, it will help you to be more open and honest and question your biases that you have. You can read nonfiction, you can read fiction, you can listen to people. Social media is excellent because you can at least experience conversations that maybe you wouldn't have at home if you live in sort of a less diverse area, or you don't have very many diverse friends. It can really help you open up, and it won't solve the problems of your bias, but it will help you to address how to question them, I think.
Yeah,
and I think acknowledging that you do have certain biases is really important anyway, rather than just pretending that you haven't or not seeing that you have, because everyone does have biases towards certain things anyway, and if you acknowledge that, then you can sort of when you're creating a diverse character, if they're a different marginalization to you, or if they share a different identity, then you can really sort of be more mindful and aware of the character that you're writing and try to avoid writing them in a stereotypical way. Because the first way you write them, it might be a stereotype that you haven't even realized that you've got that bias, because if that's just the ideologies that you've grown up around. So I think it's really important just to sort of be open to the fact that what you're writing might be harmful for the group, the identity that you are writing about. And then Nia, as you were saying, just listening to the sensitivity readers and taking on board their feedback. I do sensitivity reading for disabled characters, and I've had some authors say to me that they're not agreeing with my feedback, the way that they've represented their disabled character. And it's fine to disagree with my feedback, but you still do need to take it on board. And I do think using multiple sensitivity readers as well can be really helpful, rather than just relying on what one individual is saying, because one person cannot represent the whole of that minority group as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So that was one caveat I was going to say, because you could ask, a gay person to read your book, but if you ask 5, you might very well get 5 opinions that they can't possibly represent the whole experience. It has to be, it's helpful, but it's not, I would say that sensitivity readers are a tool, but they're not a magic wand, because clearly you can give something to 5 Jewish people or 5 gay people, and you might get 20 answers out of all that. You're not going to get some one solid, unless you really, really wrote such a stereotype that every single person, hits on that one just really, really, stereotypical thing. So it is important to know that sensitivity readers are tools, but I don't think they're a magic that will give you a guarantee.
Yeah.
for your book. Maybe we're leaning on them a little bit too much, and we need to realize there's still one person's experience.
I think also it can be a learning experience, can't it? I mean, if you listen to your readers, because obviously we're not writing just one book and then we're done. You listen to your readers. If you're getting feedback, you can accept that you were wrong, or that your opinions have changed, or that your biases have changed as you progress as an author, and not being afraid to admit that you were wrong, or you didn't portray something as sensitively as you could, is I think learning to apologize and accept and figure out how to fix that going forward is really important as well.
Yeah. I also think especially with YA books, that if you have multiple sensitivity readers, a lot of the issues that get called out or identified, they are glaringly offensive issues. They're not subtle. They're not little subtle details that one person may agree with and one person may like disagree with. I think the ones that really perpetuate the harm are the ones that are so glaring and so gross that there's pretty much a consensus that is not okay, and that work needs to be done with the manuscript or with the plot or with the characterization. So no, multiple sensitivity readers are not like the magical cure-all, but I think they do go a long way towards helping. But also, as we've said earlier in the conversation, another facet of that is having diverse friends, and actually writing the stories that you do with the diversity that you choose to include for a genuine, earnest, reason, and coming from a good place, and not necessarily just to sell books because you think that's what's on like trend, or just because you're like, I need a diverse character in here so I don't get called out, or so I don't get disparaged, because that's not a legitimate reason either. Or even thinking that, this story needs to be told, so I'm the one to tell it, and having that hero savior complex, because that's not a legitimately good reason either. So it's just really doing the work to interrogate what types of diversity you're choosing to include in your story and why. And on top of that, getting sensitivity readers, and more than one of them.
Right.
I also think getting like professional sensitivity readers is different than just having a friend who is part of the identity group, because they will have, I think, like 10 different opinions. And I think that's so important that you brought that up, Gila, because I think so often I get asked this, and so many people get asked to sort of represent your entire identity. And that's honestly offensive in and of itself, that we'd all think the same way and react the same way to a book. But what a professional sensitivity reader does, at least in my opinion, my experience, is they sort of know, not only are they a part of the identity, they sort of know what other people think. They're sort of like a political scientist or an anthropologist about that issue. And so they can go a little bit beyond what a lay reader can do to really get at what the problems in your book are, how it's going to impact society, how it's going to play with readers, how like if you get a sensitivity reader who's a person of color, they probably still have experience with intersectionality and that person of color. They have experience with how are younger readers of this race going to react, how are older readers of this race going to react. And so I always think when you can get a professional, insist your publisher, editors, get those professionals if you're not paying for them yourself. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I work as a professional sensitivity reader, and when I'm approaching a manuscript, I don't approach it from my subjective opinion. I definitely try to step back and objectively, as best I can, because of course I can't speak for my entire group. We're not, and we're definitely not a monolith, but I really try to consider all possible issues or challenges, or like internalized harm that like my marginalization would maybe pick up on, and use that to give like overall feedback that goes above and beyond my personal point of view. Yeah.
Right. So it's really important that you don't just hand your manuscript over to anyone who just hangs a sensitivity reader sign. Because it's not like, it's not like you get some, it's not like going to medical school. You don't have like an official So it's really important to like look at their background and really ask yourself if you're going to get a professional opinion. So that's another good point that's helpful to write.
And also your friends are going to, you know, they're your friends, so they're going to have that bias there. They're not going to want to hurt your feelings. They're going to try to like soften their communication and like maybe tiptoe around it issues, and maybe not be as blunt or as direct as a hired professional sensitivity reader would.
Also, it's kind of, I don't know, I've gotten this before, and it's kind of weird or borderline offensive. Read this, you're Indian, tell me what it, like, it's just a little
it is.
Right. It's probably coming from a naive place and not a...
Yeah, but it's
place.
My work, like, because I do sensitivity reading for like disability and chronic illness, a lot of manuscripts I get, they're sort of about disabilities that I don't actually have, and it's like I wish sometimes the authors would like research more about who they're going to send it to and which sensitivity readers they want, because like I can speak about my own experience with the illnesses and disabilities that I have, but that doesn't mean that I can do a like accurate sensitivity read for a character with a different condition, because you do need to sort of like research who the sensitivity reader is and what their experiences are. I am finding that I'm just sort of like some sort of as a general reader for like disability representation, whereas like it's very specific to my own sort of expertise, and like we can't just like I can't do like a sensitivity read for disabilities that I haven't had. That's not my place to do it, and I would be really worried about like making something that is really harmful representation. So
I completely agree with that. And sort of off of that, I think I've seen a lot of sensitivity readers for people with disabilities who have physical disabilities, but then they do sensitivity readings for people with either invisible disabilities or mental disabilities. And I think there's just such a big difference there that I really wish more people thought like you and would leave that space for sensitivity readers who actually have that experience, because I think it's really different how that plays out and how that affects your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of your favorite diverse YA authors. Who do you enjoy? Because people, I know that lately, because of so much lockdown and home time, I've been taking a lot more workshops than I would normally have time to do. So they talk a lot about mentor texts. You know, we're looking for mentor texts when you're writing. So do you recommend, diverse YA authors that either just to enjoy or to use as mentor texts? Because that's another, we were talking about tools to give writers who are watching and looking for tips, having diverse friends, using sensitivity. But I think also using a mentor text is another really good tool. Do you recommend any?
Well, I have recommendations for really good diverse YA thrillers. Tiffany D. Jackson is a queen of YA thrillers. Any and everything she writes is phenomenal. There's Monday's Not Coming. There's Allegedly. There's Let Me Hear a Rhyme. She is really, really awesome. I think as far as I don't know. As far as mentor texts are looking at a template to see how diversity is done well. I don't know that I necessarily am comfortable with using the term, because I mean, yeah, you can learn a lot through reading works that are good
that, right? Reading
representations, but also I don't think you can actually pick up a book and say, oh well, they did diversity well, so let me read this book, and just from reading a book, that'd be kind of like a master class in how you can replicate it. I think the work is a lot more complex than that, and takes a little bit more effort. So I'm not necessarily sure that I would like recommend something as a mentor text or like a guidebook. Yeah,
I think as well, different books have different strengths. and
Yeah.
we can take the strength from one book
Mhm.
and appreciate that is a strength of that particular book, and not necessarily be able to translate it into either our own work or another similar book. You know, there are some great books that have, for me, you know, either great representation for sexuality, but maybe not great race representation. So I wouldn't consider them to be mentor texts because they don't have everything, but they are worth reading because they have something that I can learn from that, or just a great experience of reading it.
Yeah, but that's valid, right? Because you
Yeah.
might be working on just a particular weakness, and you're only really looking at those texts. One thing you might get from good mentor texts is really what you shouldn't be doing. I often tell people that you might want to learn what to do.
This is true.
But you can sometimes, like, people will say, I might recommend an author, and they might say, oh, I don't enjoy that author. And then I will say, well, why not? Like, concrete, write down 3 reasons why not. Because learning what not to do, and if you're a baker or a lot of arts, learning what not to do can often be a really good start. You know, analyze, why don't you like it? Well, I found it offensive. What did they do? Like you said, was it tokenism that you found offensive? Did it come off as cliche? I mean, you also have to learn what not to do, right? That we're so inundated with media from such a young age that, like a lot of you have said, we don't even know that we're doing it. It's just automatic. It's just like writing like pretty and blonde. They just go together, like pretty blonde. They just, in my mind, they just go like boop, because probably from 1 year old, that's what I heard constantly, that the pretty girls were the blonde girls, definitely not the dark girls, right? So you can use them to learn what not to do. And sometimes I definitely recommend, especially, there's certain people that really need that help if they're really trying to branch out. But so Nia recommended one author. Does anyone else have YA diverse recommendations?
I recently read Scars Like Wings.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead.
Oh,
Like, what's going on? I can't hear.
Yeah, I recently read Scars Like Wings by Erin Stewart, and it has the most amazing disability representation in it that I've ever read before. Because like you've got the main character who is a victim of burns and like a fire, and you've got her story of like healing like physically and emotionally from that. And then her best friend is also a wheelchair user, and so you've got like 2 like disabled characters right from the start who are absolutely central to the whole book. And then like each character is completely fully developed and well-rounded. And because like one of the reasons tokenism is so harmful is because like usually it will just be a stereotype that's used to just include a diversity just to like tick a box. And then quite often with those characters, the token character does get killed off quite early. And because they're not actually central to a plot, then the book doesn't rely on them being in it. So then often they will just get killed off. Like even in like TV series, they might not even last the whole season because they're not actually needed to tell the story. So when I'm looking at diverse YA thrillers, like I really love it when there's not just like one sort of diverse character, but there's multiple, and that they're all main characters, but they're more than just their diversity. So they've got like their ambitions, their dreams, their hopes, their personality, and they're so well developed. Because like when you've got a token character, you'll pretty much have every character well developed, apart from the token character whose only sort of defining trait is their diverse like characteristics. So that's why I really liked Scars Like Wings by Erin Stewart, because it was just really refreshing to have like 2 female main characters. Both of them are disabled, and both of them, they're just completely different characters to each other as well. And it's just showing sort of like how different you can be, and like they're not really similar at all, even though they're both got like this, both disabled. So yeah, that's one that I would definitely recommend.
I sort of have. Oh, sorry.
No, I've written down the names of these authors.
I was gonna say I sort of definitely appreciate the sort of big names. They're big names for a reason, like Tomi Adeyemi or Angie Thomas. And I think one thing that they did was really start the trend towards authentic voices are okay, not just diverse characters who have diverse stories, but the voice is different, and that's incredible. Sort of Benjamin Alier-Saenz in that note as well. I was recently rediscovering sort of both Cindy Pon and Lamar Giles. And I actually just discovered, I didn't know this before, Lamar Giles sort of also helped found We Need Diverse Books, which I had no idea. So that's awesome. And I sort of think that's more thrillery. I think most of the examples I usually think of when I think of authors who write diverse characters authentically are usually like contemporary or maybe fantasy. But I'm trying to think more in the thriller space of who does a good job of diversity. And I kind of want to go back to what Maddie was saying just about it being a part of their character, but it not being something you can just throw away or sort of it not belonging to a character who's a side character who's not necessary to the plot. And I think that's so important. And it's so important to keep pushing that and never give up. I have had several people in the industry tell me to change that and to rewrite the book, which in sort of our case, me and my co-author's case, would be rewriting the book because it is so woven into who they are throughout the entire book. And I think that's so important, and that excites me when I see it in a book that someone got it out there, that they didn't give up. I was recently reading about how hard even someone as incredible as Angie Thomas with her incredible agent had to just get that book Hate U Give published because people were like, we already have our one Black author who's writing this. We don't need another one. And I definitely hear that and I see that. And so when I look for authors, I try not to judge if it doesn't sound super authentic or if they messed up, because sometimes maybe it wasn't even them. And I try to learn from that both ways, if it's good or bad. And I also just love reading fantasy or sci-fi or thrillers that are about identity or that have an identity component, not just the contemporary books. I write contemporary too, but I just love to see that it can be a part of a well-faceted, rounded character. It's not, you're not just the minority.
You made a really good point. So when we have issues with diversity, we tend to target just the author. And yes, it's the author's responsibility because, I mean, they wrote the book first and foremost. But we also forget that they had a whole team behind them that signed the book, that acquired the book, that, you know, publicized the book, that marketed the book. And we really need to, you know, get better about holding not just authors accountable for positive rep and for not perpetuating harm, but just in every level, from like agents to editors to imprints to publishing houses, just across the board, we need to really push to hold publishing as a whole to that higher standard. Yeah.
And those people have more money, they have more power.
Exactly.
Almost always white. They are frequently male, especially when you go to the upper echelons to publishing houses. They're almost always straight, or at least, no, I don't know if they are, but they are present as. And I mean, they have so much more power than authors. I've seen so many of my friends give in to the pressure that they hear from agents and editors, especially until recently. Because they just want to be published and they want to be writers. And I've been told so many times, you know, write white people or write this specific immigrant story and we'll sell it. And it's tempting. It's really tempting. And so sometimes I don't want to blame the author just because the industry is so tough and you have to make it. And sort of the same thing we're hearing out of Hollywood these days. And I wish we were talking about it more in our industry because it's so important.
Yeah, I think it's great that even just recently there's been more of a dialogue, because when I was first getting started, you know, there was advice, not necessarily from professionals, but just from people in general who were in the same situation as me, saying, well, you know, you could always write straight characters to start with and then branch out once you've established a name for yourself. And I feel like you shouldn't have to do that. You know, no matter what identity you're writing about, you shouldn't have to do that. And so authors that, you know, they're not necessarily the most diverse, but I loved Robin Talley's As I Descended, because for me it was like one of the first sort of LGBT, like it was so well populated by LGBT characters, and it's Shakespeare as well, so like you can't really go wrong. So it's, you know, updating those classics, and I feel like the dialogue we need to have is about helping others up and giving advice that isn't detrimental as well, saying, you know, actually keep going, and we need to question it at every level.
And I think for own voices writers, we also need to have the dialogue. And we've started to have it, that there's just not one type of story that will sell well. Like, I'm a Black woman, and, for a Black identity in like publishing traditionally, there has been this prevailing idea that a pain narrative or that a trauma narrative is what will sell. And those have been historically the stories with Black protagonists that have, been pushed and marketed, and that have been bought and that have been assigned value to. But we just need more stories. Like, I'm a huge science fiction and fantasy writer. I love contemporary thrillers too, but we just need more stories, I feel like, about Black joy, just about, Black kids and Black adults just getting to be the heroes and going on adventures in those pirate romps and getting to sleuth it as a private eye, or just whatever the case may be. Instead of, our pain and our... Oh,
we lost you.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I was just saying we just need more stories about, just the fun heroics, the pirate romps, the sleuthing, the murder mysteries, the private eyes, whatever. Just getting to just experience those heroic stories without always having to write about our pain or our trauma, and having that be the thing that's valued.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that really resonates with me. It happens so often in writing that it's just, if you have a Holocaust story, and if it's not a Holocaust story, obviously that's an extremely important topic and extremely important that there are books, but it's I just always written books. There are a lot of other things to write about. Like you said, there's a lot of other experiences. Culture has been around for thousands of years, all kinds of languages and countries and traditions. And it's basically, if you're submitting a book, they're expecting it to be Holocaust, either first generation or second generation, and even growing up and reading those books, you start to feel like exactly what you said. Like, is this my whole background? It's just pain, trauma, extreme negativity. Is there no other? Can we have any kind of celebration of science fiction, fantasy, other great stories? There's a big problem, I think, in various cultures like that, where whoever these powers that be, whoever they are, decide that this is what the market is, this is what sells. And like you said, Isvari, before, okay, we already have that one book. Okay, we already took our YA Holocaust book. Exactly. So that's it for the season. Like, come back next year. There's nothing else going on. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of different cultures suffer, for lack of a better word, they suffer from that, where they're cut out of the market.
Yeah, and I think
you want the kind of token Black trauma book, token Holocaust book, and that's it.
Yeah, because I feel like diversity leads to more diversity. If you've got paving the way, isn't it? I mean, people talk all the time about how there's always discourse on Twitter about how there are no FF books, and everyone says, but there are. It's just that they're less prevalent maybe than MM books. And then you say, well, there's less trans narratives. Well, no, there are, but they're coming, and you just need to make space for them, because there's enough out there. We just need to get them into the hands of readers.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier, where they expect us to write for the majority and like cis straight white people. And so they think cis straight white people want to hear this story about the minority. They want to hear that, struggling Black kid who made it, or that Indian immigrant who discovered and loved America, which I have been told to write so many times. Like, at least write it, sort of what Fran was saying earlier, write a normal book. And then if you're successful, you can write what you want. And so I think part of it is because they expect us to be writing to the majority, and they don't know what's going to sell. I firmly believe that what publishers tell people is going to sell is because they control the market. And so it's sort of like Hollywood saying, well, this is going to be the blockbuster. Well, yes, because you picked it up and you're
and you poured hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of marketing behind it. That's why
Exactly. Customers all the time. I'm a bookseller. When money is behind the books, sell generally.
Yeah.
Generally. And I think that actually the instances where the money behind the book and they don't sell is actually because they're very boring. There's no diversity. It's there's no market for them because they're boring. If you put money behind books at marketing level, to get them into the hands of bloggers and booksellers and get them on posters and there's all that kind of marketing and advertising, of course they'll sell. And they'll sell to everybody, not just
exactly. Yeah.
So you're saying that it's not the fault of the average reader. Readers do want all different kinds of stories, and they're just not getting it. It's kind of the McDonaldization of books.
I can't speak for adult readers, but I'm a teacher too, so I know from a teen and young adult perspective, we have a phenomenal group of young people coming up behind us, and my diverse literature that I teach in my classroom, they suck up and they love and they gravitate to, and they want diversity in their lit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Madeline, did you have any chat questions that you wanted to take now? Because we're coming up to an hour, or should we continue?
Yeah, we haven't actually got any live questions that have come up. So long as I've all the technology right, I can't actually see it.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure. I don't know if you're actually looking, if you were actually wanting for gap there. I don't know if you were just politely waiting for a gap or not. So I thought I'd just give it.
I have a question, actually. If
okay.
What can we do as authors to sort of help change this? Because besides writing diverse books, sometimes we're the victim of what is intense marginalization by the industry or by fellow authors. How can we keep fighting? What are good ways to keep fighting beyond writing diverse books? Are there ways to raise this conversation more? Is it just a question of tweeting and hoping agents and editors change? How do we put pressure? How do we do that?
I think. Oh, you go.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I don't know. I can't speak for all authors. I can only speak for the things I try to do, for myself and with my own career and publishing relationships. It's just having an open dialogue, and social media is one place. I know people are like, oh, it's just Twitter, but a good bit of the publishing community is tuned into the important conversations being had. So I think that's one piece. And you have phenomenal authors like Danielle Clayton and L.L. McKinney and Heidi Helig and Justina Ireland, who have really been the trailblazers to really make publishing start interrogating itself, at least in the YA space, and some of its own biases. So, I mean, they're phenomenal examples to look to as work you can do outside of just writing. I think another piece of it is being, critical about who you choose to represent you if you're looking for the agenting route, because who you're paying to work for you kind of feeds into what ideas that you're starting as far as what they hold, what values they hold, and what they're promoting and upholding. I know when we talk about publishing tracks, we're all writers at the end of the day, and it's a job. So we all have to make those tough decisions about imprints to go with or editors to sign with. But I think there's a face of work that can be done there too, really trying to promote change from the inside out. I'm fortunate enough to have a phenomenal editor behind me. I'm working with David Pomerico at Harper Voyager US on my debut. And I felt very supported there. And I just feel like
I think we lost you, Nia.
Still there? Okay, I don't know if she's slowing down a little. Did you want to jump in, Fran, with your ideas?
I just think it's important.
Just about having the conversations and
Technology.
We lost you. Are you back?
There, you went in and out. Well, I would say that this is something, I think what Madeline's done here, this is exactly what we need to be doing. I don't think that there isn't enough time in the world to wait constantly for top-down solutions. I think there have to also be bottom-up solutions. The top-down solutions, it's so entrenched. The advice you were saying about just write an Indian novel, like I've had similar advice. It's like a relief to hear you say that, because it's like really the first time that I've heard other people say where, just write this, just write that, where I've just been told this is the kind of story you need to write, and then, you'll make it, and then we'll do whatever. I personally have resisted that, as you have, which is Nia saying that's not necessarily the best business decision. You are under pressure, so you have to have a priority of values of what you're going to put first. But I just think that we can see now, even in the current disaster situation, things move so slowly from the top down. We have to do it from the bottom up. I think what Madeline's initiated here is fantastic. And I just saw, I don't go on Twitter very often, but I just saw this little tweet and I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. And I think that we need to have a lot more of these type of meetings. Also in terms of global diversity, people from different countries, different places is also the global diversity of it is important. Of course, it's important if you're in the United States and you're in a particular state to be with diverse authors, but go global, because so many things you've said have resonated with me, and I haven't had people to sort of relate to on that level, because I'm that's not the majority of the writers that I meet. So I think we do have to have more bottom-up initiatives, and we should at least take advantage of the good of the situation with Zoom and streaming that we can now collect, at no cost and very easily, and there's more of an audience for it because so many people are at home who would not normally be at home. There's an audience, and we should be using this time.
I think consuming diverse media as well, just consume as much of it as you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Get it out of the library, recommend it, talk to your friends. As a bookseller, I find it really important to try and keep on top of my recommendations and making sure that I'm recommending new and fresh and exciting and diverse books. I know it's the same in the film industry. Stream stuff people are talking about, and one of the best ways to help from the bottom up is to get things seen and get things noticed, and the best thing to do is talk about it, isn't it? It's
yeah. I think another important fact of that is to operate on like a reaching back model. So I mean, just to help out other authors, like amplify other voices, promote other voices, talk about other books, gush about other books, and just support your community. And that's another thing that you can do as a writer other than solely writing.
I try to interview as many other writers as possible on my website, for example, and send them around and promote them, because I think you do have to think of yourself also. Everybody's obviously interested in their own books, but you also have a larger there's a larger goal. First of all, literacy is a goal for me as a mom. Too many of my kids' friends do not read unless they're into Instagram posts. So literacy in general is a goal, but then the diversity within literacy and meeting other authors, it's really important. It's definitely not just about me. So I think we have to do more things like this, and great people like Madeline have set them up for us, so we can just click a link and
dive in.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
YA ThrillerCon, we've got like more panels scheduled for today and tomorrow. So if any of you want to look at the schedule, it's at our website, yathrillercon.co.uk.
fun.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, guys. It's been great.
Thank you so